Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back, way back, over 1,000 years, to a time when getting a simple toothache could feel like signing your own death warrant. Imagine you're living in a muddy, bustling medieval town, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and frankly, things you probably don't want to think too hard about. Someone nearby is coughing, another is groaning from a mysterious ailment, and the local healer is preparing, well, let's just say it involves leeches, hot irons, or maybe a delightful concoction of animal bile and ground-up gemstones. You probably won't survive this era without a robust constitution and a healthy dose of luck, even for something we'd fix with a couple of ibuprofen today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment with where you're listening from tonight and the local time. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing there, wincing at the thought of medieval medical intervention, and it's easy to paint the whole era with one broad brush of pain and questionable hygiene. And to be fair, a lot of it was pretty grim. The prevailing understanding of the body, largely based on ancient Greek humoral theory, often led to treatments designed to violently restore balance. Think aggressive bloodletting to remove excess blood, or powerful emetics and purgatives to expel humors believed to be causing illness. If you had a fever, they might drain what they thought was hot blood. If you were lethargic, they might try to shock you into action with something equally unpleasant. Surgery, when performed, was often brutal, fast, and without effective anesthesia, relying more on speed and prayer than precision and sterile technique. You might survive the procedure, only to succumb to infection later. It was a world where the cure could feel as bad, if not worse, than the disease itself. But here's where our story takes a fascinating turn. While this harsh reality was certainly widespread, particularly in parts of medieval Europe, there were other centers of learning where different philosophies were taking root. And in the heartland of the Islamic Golden Age, stretching across Persia and the wider Middle East, a different kind of medical mind was emerging, one who would champion a surprisingly gentle approach. Enter Abu Ali al-Husayn ibn Sina, known to the Latin West, and to us tonight, as Avicenna. Born near Bokhara, in what is now Uzbekistan, in the late 10th century, Avicenna was a product of an era that actively sought out, preserved, and built upon the knowledge of ancient civilizations, including the Greeks, Romans, Persians, and Indians. Unlike the fragmented medical knowledge sometimes found elsewhere, scholars in this period had access to a wealth of texts, translating them into Arabic and engaging in vibrant intellectual debate. You might picture monks painstakingly copying manuscripts in chilly monasteries, but here, imagine bustling libraries filled with scholars discussing everything from astronomy to philosophy to medicine, fueled by coffee, a relative newcomer to the scene, but you get the idea, an intellectual curiosity. Avicenna didn't just inherit this knowledge, he devoured it at an astonishing pace. He was a child prodigy, reportedly having mastered the entire Quran by the age of 10 and delving deep into philosophy, logic, and mathematics shortly thereafter. By his late teens, he was already practicing medicine, having taught himself from existing texts and through direct observation. Think about that. You're barely old enough to drive, in modern terms, obviously, and you're already being called upon to treat serious illnesses. It's mind-boggling. What set Avicenna apart from many of his contemporaries, however, wasn't just his intellect, but his fundamental philosophy towards healing. While humoral theory was the bedrock of his medical understanding, just as it was for many others, his interpretation and application of it leaned heavily towards restoring balance through the least invasive means possible. He wasn't the first to suggest diet or lifestyle mattered, but he systematized it and prioritized it in a way that felt revolutionary compared to the common practice of immediately reaching for the scalpel or the strongest purgative. Imagine you go to see a healer in this era. In one scenario, you might be told your humors are out of whack and immediately have a vein open to drain some blood. In Avicenna's world, or at least the world he advocated for, the first questions would likely be about your diet, your sleep, your daily habits, your emotional state. His approach was fundamentally about understanding the whole person and the underlying causes of imbalance, rather than just attacking the symptoms with brute force. This isn't to say Avicenna never used harsh methods. Surgery and strong medicines were part of his toolkit, but they were presented as later options, reserved for when gentler methods failed. This was a significant departure. While mainstream historical fact confirms that bloodletting and purging were staples of medieval medicine across many cultures, a quirky or fringe tidbit you might find is the sheer variety of bizarre ingredients used in potions, from crushed pearls, expensive but probably harmless, to less appealing things like animal excrement, or even parts of mummified bodies, definitely not harmless. Avicenna, while using a vast pharmacopoeia, focused more on plant-based remedies and natural substances, emphasizing purity and preparation, which we'll get into later. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's gentler philosophy was truly unique to him, or if it represented a stronger emphasis on existing, but often overlooked, aspects of Greco-Roman and Persian medicine within the Islamic world. Was he a lone voice, or the most famous proponent of a wider, more nuanced tradition? Regardless, his systematic articulation of this approach, especially in his magnum opus, the Canon of Medicine, codified a medical philosophy that prioritized prevention, lifestyle, and gentle remedies before resorting to more drastic measures. This foundational principle, balance before blades, nourishment before noxious purges, was the surprisingly gentle start to a medical legacy that would span centuries and continents. It was a beacon of reasoned, patient-centered care in an age often defined by suffering and crude interventions. You've got this image of a harsh medieval world, maybe some monks copying texts by candlelight in a cold stone room. Now, flip that image. Picture vibrant cities like Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and closer to Avicenna's birthplace, Bokhara and Samarkand. These weren't just centers of commerce. They were intellectual powerhouses during what we now call the Islamic Golden Age, roughly from the 8th to the 14th centuries. Imagine grand libraries, sometimes called houses of wisdom, filled not just with religious texts, but with scrolls and books on philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, geography, and of course, medicine. These weren't quiet, dusty places. They were buzzing with activity, scholars debating, translating, and writing. It was like the internet and the world's biggest university library rolled into one, powered by human brain power and a serious commitment to knowledge. One of the most significant achievements of this era, and a mainstream historical fact often highlighted, was the massive translation movement. Scholars weren't just preserving ancient Greek texts, they were actively seeking them out, translating them into Arabic, and integrating them with Persian, Indian, and other regional knowledge. Think of it as a global intellectual scavenger hunt, bringing together the best minds and texts from across the known world. They translated Hippocrates, Galen, Aristotle, Euclid, Ptolemy, and countless others. It's thanks to these Arabic translations that much of this ancient knowledge survived and was later reintroduced to Europe. Without these scholars and their libraries, a huge chunk of classical learning might have been lost to us entirely. So, you're essentially standing in the middle of a global knowledge exchange program, centuries before anyone even dreamed of a printing press. And into this incredibly fertile ground steps our protagonist, Avicenna. He wasn't just born into this era. He was the embodiment of its potential. From an incredibly young age, it was clear he was operating on a different level. We're talking serious prodigy here. By the time most kids are just figuring out basic arithmetic, Avicenna had reportedly memorized the entire Quran, a feat of memory that would impress anyone today, let alone in the 10th century. He then dove headfirst into other fields. Logic, philosophy, mathematics, he devoured them. He was supposedly so far ahead that by his late teens, he was teaching his own teachers in some subjects. Imagine being a professor and having your teenage student correct your understanding of complex philosophy. Talk about an awkward parent-teacher conference. His path into medicine was just as astonishingly rapid. He didn't attend a formal medical school in the way we understand it today. Those structures were still evolving. Instead, he taught himself, primarily by reading every available text he could get his hands on. He studied the works of Hippocrates and Galen, of course, but also Persian and Indian medical traditions, synthesizing this vast body of knowledge. He learned anatomy from observation, though detailed dissection was limited by religious and cultural norms, pathology from examining patients, and therapeutics from studying the effects of different substances. It was a process of intense, self-directed study combined with practical experience. A quirky or fringe tidbit about his early career is the story of how he gained access to one of the most renowned libraries of the time. When he was just 18, his reputation had already grown enough that he was called to treat the Samanid ruler of Bokhara, Ibn Mansur, who was suffering from a severe illness that had stumped the court physicians. Avicenna successfully treated the ruler, and when offered a reward, he didn't ask for gold or land. Instead, he asked for permission to access the royal library, which was apparently exceptional. Imagine curing a king just to get a library card. He spent years in that library, absorbing knowledge across all fields, noting that he read every book in it at least once, and some multiple times. He said he would later recall the contents of a book and the exact shelf where he'd found it. It sounds almost unbelievable, but it speaks to his photographic memory and insatiable curiosity. So, by the age of 18, he wasn't just studying medicine, he was actively practicing it, treating high-profile patients. Think about that responsibility. Most of us were still trying to figure out how to do our laundry at 18, and Avicenna was dealing with life-and-death medical decisions for royalty. This rapid ascent and early practice raise interesting questions. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's early medical practice was truly independent from the start, or if he received more informal guidance or mentorship from established physicians than his own writings explicitly state. Did he truly leap from self-study to treating kings, or were there unrecorded periods of apprenticeship or collaboration? Regardless, his documented success at such a young age solidified his reputation and set the stage for his later monumental work. His brilliance wasn't just about absorbing information, it was about organizing it, synthesizing it, and building upon it. He wasn't content to just repeat what the ancients said. He questioned, experimented, within the limits of the time, and developed his own theories and methods. This environment of intellectual freedom and the vast resources available in the Islamic Golden Age were the perfect crucible for a mind like Avicenna's. It allowed him to bypass some of the more rigid traditions found elsewhere and develop a medical philosophy that, while rooted in the past, looked towards a more rational and, crucially, more gentle future for healing. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a philosopher, an astronomer, a mathematician, and a poet. But it was his early, intense immersion in the medical world, fueled by that extraordinary prodigy path, that would lay the groundwork for the gentle authority of his most famous work, the Canon of Medicine. So, you've got this astonishingly brilliant young man, soaking up knowledge like a sponge in the intellectual hothouse of the Islamic Golden Age. He's not just reading, he's synthesizing, connecting ideas across disciplines, and already practicing medicine with remarkable success. But all this learning, all this experience, needed a place to land, a way to be organized and shared. Avicenna, driven by his insatiable desire for understanding and his systematic mind, didn't just write a few papers or case studies. Oh no. He set out to create the definitive medical text of his time, a comprehensive blueprint for healing that would stand for centuries. And that text is his most famous legacy, Al-Canon fi al-Tib, known to the Latin West, and to us tonight, as the Canon of Medicine. Imagine trying to condense all known medical knowledge, from ancient Greece, Rome, Persia, India, and his own observations and experiments, into one place. That's what Avicenna did. The Canon is a monumental work, a true encyclopedia of medicine, organized into 5 books. Book 1 covers general principles, including anatomy, physiology, causes of disease, and the signs of health and illness. Book 2 is a materia medica, listing and describing medicinal substances. Book 3 details diseases specific to organs and systems, from head to toe. Book 4 deals with general diseases affecting the whole body, like fevers and poisons, as well as surgery. And Book 5 is a formulary, providing compound remedies. It's absolutely massive, covering everything from the intricate workings of the human body, as understood then, to detailed descriptions of thousands of drugs and treatments. This sheer scope and systematic organization is a mainstream historical fact that highlights its revolutionary nature for the time. It wasn't just a collection of remedies, but a logically structured framework for understanding and practicing medicine. But what truly sets the canon apart, and aligns with our theme tonight, is the philosophy underpinning this vast compendium. While it's rooted in the humoral theory, like most medicine of the era, Avicenna's interpretation emphasized balance and prevention as the primary goals, and gentle interventions as the first line of defense. He didn't see disease as a punishment, or something to be violently purged from the body right away. He saw it as an imbalance of the humors, yes, but an imbalance that the body often had the capacity to correct itself, given the right support. His approach was fundamentally about aiding the body's natural healing processes, not overriding them with force. Think of it like this: if your car starts making a funny noise, bear with me on the modern analogy, some mechanics might immediately want to rip out the engine and replace it. Avicenna's approach would be like checking the oil, the tires, the filters, making sure everything is properly lubricated and running smoothly before even considering major surgery. His canon systematically laid out this hierarchy of treatment. First, address lifestyle factors: diet, exercise, sleep, emotional state, environmental conditions. These were the foundational elements for maintaining health and restoring balance. Only if these gentle methods failed would you move on to simple medicines. If those didn't work, then you'd consider more complex compound remedies. And only as a last resort, when all other options were exhausted, would you consider surgery or the most potent, potentially dangerous drugs. This structured, step-by-step approach, prioritizing the least invasive methods, was a core, gentle principle woven throughout the entire canon. Compare this to the immediate inclination in some medieval medical practices to jump to bloodletting or harsh purges for almost any ailment. Avicenna codified a different path, one that required patience, careful observation, and a deep understanding of the individual patient and their unique constitution. He emphasized the importance of the physician's knowledge, not just of diseases and drugs, but of the patient's temperament, lifestyle, and environment. It wasn't just about fixing a broken part. It was about restoring harmony to the whole system. A quirky or fringe tidbit from the canon involves his detailed descriptions of the pulse. Avicenna dedicated significant space to pulse diagnosis, describing over 10 different types of pulse and what they might indicate about a patient's condition. He discussed pulses that were saw-like, gazelle-like, undulating, or even worm-like. While pulse diagnosis was a common practice, Avicenna's incredibly detailed classification and the significance he placed on it were particularly notable, almost treating the pulse as a language the body used to communicate its state of balance or imbalance. Imagine a doctor today feeling your wrist and telling you your pulse feels like a gazelle. It's a fascinating glimpse into the intricate observational skills medieval physicians cultivated. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's strong emphasis on gentle remedies and lifestyle was a radical departure from existing medical traditions or if it was a more prominent codification and articulation of principles that were already present, but perhaps less emphasized, in the Greco-Roman and Persian medical texts he studied. Did he invent this gentle hierarchy, or did he perfect its presentation and make it central to medical practice? Regardless, his canon became the authoritative text that spread this philosophy far and wide. Writing a book this comprehensive is a monumental task today, even with computers and the internet. Imagine doing it in the 11th century, relying on handwritten manuscripts and your own incredible memory and organizational skills. It's the kind of project that makes writing a master's thesis look like writing a grocery list. Avicenna poured his life's work into the canon, and its impact was immediate and long-lasting. It wasn't just a summary of past knowledge, it was a synthesis that added his own insights, observations, and philosophical framework. It provided a logical, systematic, and remarkably gentle approach to healing in an era that often desperately needed it. This wasn't just a textbook, it was a manifesto for a more rational, more humane way to practice medicine, laying out the principles of balance before blades, a concept we'll explore further as we delve deeper into his health philosophy. So, you've got this incredible, multi-volume encyclopedia of medicine, the Canon, compiled by Avicenna. But it wasn't just a list of diseases and drugs, remember? It was built on a foundational philosophy, a way of seeing the human body and health that felt remarkably different from the immediate go-to methods of the time. At its heart was the concept of balance, not just of the humors, which was standard theory, but a much broader, more holistic balance encompassing the entire person and their environment. Imagine your body isn't just a collection of parts that break down and need fixing, but a complex, interconnected ecosystem. That's closer to how Avicenna viewed it. Health, in his philosophy, wasn't just the absence of disease, it was a state of optimal balance among the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and their corresponding qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry. But crucially, this balance was constantly influenced by what Avicenna called the 6 non-naturals. Now, calling them non-naturals sounds a bit confusing, like maybe they were artificial or weird. But in this context, it just meant things that are external to the body's inherent physical structure, naturals, but essential for maintaining health or causing disease. These 6 non-naturals were: 1. Air and environment, the quality of the air you breathe, where you live. 2. Food and drink, diet and hydration. 3. Movement and rest, exercise and sleep. 4. Sleep and wakefulness, closely related to rest. 5. Evacuation and retention, bodily excretions. And 6. Mental/emotional states. This emphasis on the 6 non-naturals as primary determinants of health and disease is a mainstream historical fact about Avicenna's medical philosophy. He didn't just mention them in passing, he integrated them deeply into his diagnostic and therapeutic approach. Before considering potent drugs or procedures, a physician trained in Avicenna's methods would meticulously inquire about these aspects of a patient's life. This is where the balance before blades idea really comes into play. If a patient presented with symptoms, the first step wasn't to bleed them or give them a harsh purge. It was to assess which of the 6 non-naturals were out of balance. Are they breathing polluted air? Eating too much of certain foods? Not sleeping enough? Suffering from intense stress or sadness? Avicenna believed that correcting these imbalances through gentle means, adjusting diet, recommending specific types of exercise or rest, changing the environment, or addressing emotional distress, could often restore health without needing more drastic interventions. It was like fine-tuning the ecosystem rather than launching a full-scale assault. Think about a headache. In some medieval practices, that might immediately suggest an excess of blood needing to be drained. Avicenna, following his philosophy, would first ask about your diet. Did you eat something heavy or hot? Your sleep. Are you sleep-deprived? Your stress levels. Are you worried? Or even the air quality in your home. He might recommend a change in diet, more rest, or perhaps a gentle herbal remedy before even considering bloodletting. This hierarchy of treatment, starting with the least invasive lifestyle adjustments, was a cornerstone of his philosophy as laid out in the Canon. It required a different kind of medical practice, one based more on careful observation, detailed questioning, and patient education, rather than just applying a standard set of procedures based on symptoms. This focus on prevention and lifestyle was revolutionary in its systematic application. While ancient physicians like Hippocrates had also recognized the importance of diet and environment, Avicenna codified these principles into a comprehensive system that prioritized them above pharmacological or surgical interventions. He argued that maintaining balance through the non-naturals was the best way to prevent illness in the first place. It was a proactive, rather than purely reactive, approach to health. You weren't just waiting to get sick to be treated, you were actively managing your life to stay healthy. Imagine trying to convince people in an era obsessed with complex potions and dramatic cures that simply eating better or getting more sleep was the key to health. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to his philosophy of balance is his detailed exploration of temperaments. Avicenna classified people into different temperamental types based on the predominance of certain humors, e.g., sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, but he went further, detailing how these temperaments influence not only physical health but also personality, susceptibility to certain diseases, and even appropriate lifestyle choices. He believed that understanding a patient's inherent temperament was crucial for prescribing the right diet, exercise, and even emotional management strategies to maintain their unique balance. It was an early form of personalized medicine, albeit based on humoral theory, treating the individual constitution rather than just the disease label. He might recommend different foods or activities for a hot, choleric person than for a cold, phlegmatic one, tailoring his gentle prescriptions to their specific internal landscape. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's strong emphasis on lifestyle and prevention was a truly novel concept he developed, or if it represented a masterful synthesis and elevation of existing, perhaps less emphasized, principles found in the Greek, Persian, and Indian medical traditions he studied. Was he creating a new path, or brilliantly illuminating and systematizing a gentler way that was already latent in the historical texts? Regardless, his clear articulation and systematic placement of these gentle methods at the top of his therapeutic hierarchy in the canon made them central to medical practice for centuries. His philosophy wasn't just theoretical, it was practical. He provided detailed guidance within the canon on how to implement these principles. What foods were best for which temperament or condition? What types of exercise were beneficial? How much sleep was optimal? He even discussed the importance of clean water and fresh air, concepts that feel incredibly modern. This wasn't just abstract thinking, it was a practical blueprint for living a healthy life and treating illness through the least disruptive means possible. It was a philosophy that prioritized the body's own capacity to heal, guided by the physician's understanding of balance and the gentle power of the 6 non-naturals. This commitment to balance before blades was the bedrock upon which his surprisingly gentle remedies were built, setting the stage for the specific dietary, rest, and exercise prescriptions that were his first line of attack against illness. So, you understand Avicenna's core idea now. Health is all about balance, and that balance is heavily influenced by those 6 non-naturals, the things external to your body's basic structure, like the air you breathe, what you eat, and how you live. This wasn't just abstract philosophy, it was a practical blueprint for healing. And when it came to putting this philosophy into action, Avicenna's first go-to prescriptions were surprisingly simple, focusing right on those controllable non-naturals: what you ate, how you rested, and how you moved. These were his gentle giants, the initial steps he took to coax the body back into harmony long before reaching for anything more drastic. Imagine you come to Avicenna complaining of, say, indigestion and a general feeling of sluggishness. A common approach might be a powerful purge to expel whatever noxious humor is thought to be causing the problem. But Avicenna's first line of questioning would likely be about your plate. What have you been eating? When? How much? He believed that diet was one of the most powerful tools for influencing the humors and restoring balance. His canon contains incredibly detailed sections on foods, classifying them not just by type, but by their inherent qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, and their effects on the body. He recommended specific foods for different temperaments, different seasons, and different ailments. If you had a fever, seen as an excess of hot humors, he might prescribe cooling foods like barley water or cucumber. If you were melancholic, associated with cold, dry black bile, he might suggest warming, moistening foods like sweet fruits or well-cooked meats with gentle spices. This isn't just eat your vegetables. It's a sophisticated system of dietary therapy aimed at subtly shifting your internal landscape. This systematic and detailed prescription of specific diets tailored to the individual's perceived humoral state and ailment, as a primary therapeutic tool, is a mainstream historical fact about Avicenna's practice as documented in the canon. It was a fundamental part of his gentle approach, aiming to correct imbalances at their source through nourishment rather than depletion. His dietary advice extended beyond just what to eat. He also discussed how to eat, recommending chewing food thoroughly, avoiding mixing certain types of foods that were thought to conflict, like milk and fish, a notion that persisted in some cultures for centuries, and paying attention to the timing of meals. He stressed the importance of eating only when truly hungry and not overeating, believing moderation was key to digestive health and overall balance. It was like having a medieval nutritionist who also happened to be a world-renowned physician and philosopher. You might think, finally, a doctor who tells me I shouldn't drink that mystery potion, and instead suggests, perhaps try a nice bowl of chicken soup and some bread. Revolutionary. Next up in his gentle arsenal was rest and sleep. In an age where hard physical labor was common and comfort was a luxury, the importance of adequate rest might seem obvious, but Avicenna codified it as a crucial medical intervention. He saw sleep not just as a period of inactivity, but as an active process essential for restoring the body and mind, allowing the humors to settle and be properly digested and distributed. Lack of sleep, or poor quality sleep, was a direct cause of humoral imbalance and illness. He recommended specific durations of sleep based on age and temperament, and even discussed the ideal sleeping environment: quiet, dark, and at a moderate temperature. He also touched on the benefits, or sometimes drawbacks, of napping, depending on the individual and their condition. It was a far cry from tough it out. It was a recognition that healing happens when the body is allowed to recover. Finally, exercise played a vital role in Avicenna's gentle prescriptions. He believed that regular, appropriate movement was essential for maintaining humoral balance, strengthening organs, and helping the body eliminate waste. But like diet and rest, his recommendations were nuanced and tailored. The type, intensity, and duration of exercise should depend on the individual's temperament, age, physical condition, and the specific ailment they were facing. For someone weak or recovering, a gentle stroll might be prescribed. For someone robust, more vigorous activity could be recommended to move stagnant humors or expel excess heat. He even discussed specific exercises for different parts of the body. A quirky or fringe tidbit from the canon related to exercise involves his detailed descriptions of using massage and passive movement, where the physician or attendant moves the patient's limbs, as therapeutic tools, especially for those too weak for active exercise. He described various massage techniques and their intended effects, from relaxing muscles to stimulating circulation and aiding digestion. Imagine going to the doctor, and instead of being told to swallow a terrifying concoction, they prescribe a specific type of massage. It highlights just how varied and non-invasive his initial approaches could be. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's detailed, systematic approach to prescribing diet, rest, and exercise represented a radical elevation of these gentle methods, giving them unprecedented prominence in medical practice, or primarily a masterful codification and refinement of existing, less systematically applied, principles found in the Greek, Persian, and Indian medical traditions he studied. Was he truly pioneering this level of detail and emphasis, or was he the most effective organizer and proponent of a more widespread, underlying gentle current in the medical knowledge he inherited? Regardless, by placing these non-invasive methods at the very beginning of his therapeutic hierarchy, he fundamentally shifted the physician's initial focus. These three pillars, diet, rest, and exercise, were Avicenna's first and often preferred tools. They were accessible, mostly, less risky than powerful drugs or surgery, and empowered the patient to participate in their own healing process through daily choices. They represent the practical application of his philosophy of balance, a systematic effort to restore harmony through the body's natural functions. Only when these foundational, gentle methods proved insufficient would he consider moving up the therapeutic ladder to more potent interventions, beginning with the healing power of herbs. So, you've tried adjusting your diet, getting more sleep, and maybe incorporating some gentle exercise, just as Avicenna would have advised as his first line of defense. But let's say those initial, gentle nudges weren't quite enough to restore your balance. What came next in Avicenna's therapeutic hierarchy? He didn't immediately reach for the medieval equivalent of dynamite. Instead, he moved to medicinal substances, but with the same underlying philosophy of gentleness and support. His focus shifted to materia medica, the study and use of medicinal materials, and here too, his approach favored healing herbs and natural substances over harsh, potentially toxic potions that were all too common elsewhere. Imagine walking into a medieval apothecary in some parts of the world, and the air is thick with the smell of things you'd rather not identify. The shelves might hold jars of leeches, dried animal parts, maybe some questionable metallic compounds. Now, picture Avicenna's ideal pharmacy, as described implicitly in the canon. While it would contain a vast array of substances, there's a clear emphasis on the plant kingdom. Herbs, flowers, roots, seeds, fruits, and plant extracts formed the backbone of his pharmacopoeia. He also included mineral substances, animal products, like honey or animal fats used in ointments, but the sheer volume and detail dedicated to plant-based remedies underscore his preference. This extensive, systematic cataloging and description of medicinal substances, with a strong emphasis on botanicals, in the canon of medicine is a mainstream historical fact that made it an indispensable reference for centuries. It wasn't just a list, it was a guide to their properties, preparation, and use. Avicenna's Materia Medica in Book 2 of the canon is incredibly detailed, describing hundreds, if not thousands, of different substances. For each substance, he would typically list its name, its inherent qualities, e.g., is it hot or cold, wet or dry, and to what degree, its effects on the body, its uses for specific ailments, potential side effects, and even how it should be prepared. This systematic approach allowed physicians to select remedies not just based on tradition, but on a reasoned understanding of how the substance interacted with the body's humors and qualities. He wasn't just throwing random things at a disease. He was carefully selecting substances that could help nudge the body's balance back into place, often using those with milder, more predictable effects first. Think back to those harsher medieval remedies we mentioned, the animal bile, the ground gemstones, maybe even parts of mummified bodies. Yes, that was a thing. Avicenna's Pharmacopoeia, while sometimes including substances that seem strange to us today, generally steered clear of the most outlandish or potentially harmful ingredients. His focus was on substances whose effects were relatively well understood through observation and experience, and which could be administered in ways that minimized discomfort or harm. Rosewater for its cooling and calming properties, barley water as a gentle, nourishing demulcent, chamomile for its soothing effects. These were the kinds of gentle giants in his medicinal toolkit, used to support healing, not assault the illness. It's a bit like choosing a soothing herbal tea over a shot of something that tastes suspiciously like drain cleaner. He also understood that even gentle substances could be harmful if used incorrectly. The canon discusses dosage, timing, and methods of preparation, emphasizing purity and quality. This attention to detail was crucial for ensuring that the remedies were effective and safe. He classified drugs by their potency, using a system of degrees. A drug might be hot in the first degree, mildly warming, or hot in the fourth degree, very intensely warming, potentially dangerous. This allowed physicians to choose substances with the lowest effective potency, again prioritizing gentleness. A quirky or fringe tidbit from Avicenna's Materia Medica is his detailed description and use of certain animal products like musk and ambergris, which might seem unusual for their medicinal properties today. Musk, a strong-smelling substance from the musk deer, was often used for its perceived warming and strengthening effects, particularly on the heart and brain. Ambergris, a waxy substance found in the digestive system of sperm whales, was highly prized and used for various ailments, often linked to its pleasant aroma and perceived warming qualities. While these are not plant-based, their use reflects the broad range of natural substances explored in the era, though even here, Avicenna often discussed their properties in terms of influencing humors and vital spirits, aiming for balance rather than violent purging. It's safe to say your modern pharmacy probably doesn't stock whale digestive byproducts for medicinal purposes, but it was part of the natural world they drew upon. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's extensive Materia Medica, particularly his detailed classification and emphasis on degrees of potency, was a truly innovative leap forward, or if it represented a brilliant synthesis and systematization of existing knowledge from various traditions, Greek, Persian, Indian, that he refined and presented with unprecedented clarity and detail in the canon. Did he fundamentally change how medicinal substances were understood and used, or did he provide the definitive, authoritative text that codified the best practices of his time, making the gentler options more accessible and understandable? Regardless, His work provided a rational framework for using medicinal substances that prioritized understanding their effects and selecting those best suited to gently restore the body's balance. His approach to materia medica was deeply intertwined with his philosophy of balance. Remedies weren't just weapons against disease, they were tools to help the body help itself. By carefully selecting substances based on their qualities and effects, and by prioritizing milder options, Avicenna provided physicians with a way to intervene when lifestyle adjustments weren't enough, but without immediately resorting to painful or dangerous procedures. This systematic, gentle approach to medicinal substances was a key pillar of his healing philosophy, demonstrating that even when moving beyond diet and rest, the goal remained subtle correction, not violent confrontation. This mastery of medicinal substances, focusing on purity and gentle effects, was essential for crafting the cures he prescribed, which brings us to the actual process of making these remedies in his era. So, you've got this incredible library of medicinal substances, mostly derived from the plant kingdom, all carefully catalogued by Avicenna in the canon based on their qualities and effects. But having the ingredients is only half the battle, right? You can't just chew on a raw herb and expect perfect results, though sometimes that was part of the process for milder things. These substances needed to be prepared, transformed from raw materials into effective, usable medicines. And this is where the art and science of pharmacy in Avicenna's era, particularly the principles he championed, becomes crucial. It wasn't just about mixing things together, it was about crafting cures with care, focusing intensely on purity, accurate dosage, and minimizing any potential harm. Imagine stepping into an apothecary shop in a bustling city like Baghdad or Samarkand during the Islamic Golden Age. It would be a sensory experience. The scent of drying herbs hanging from the ceiling, the clinking of ceramic jars and glass vials, the rhythmic scrape of a mortar and pestle. Unlike the potentially chaotic, unsanitary conditions you might picture elsewhere, the best apothecaries, influenced by scholars like Avicenna, strived for order and cleanliness. You'd see shelves lined with organized containers holding powders, liquids, resins, and oils. There would be various tools, balances and weights for precise measurement, mortars and pestles of different sizes for grinding, sieves for sifting powders, stills for distillation, a technique refined in this era, often used to produce things like rosewater or essential oils, and heating apparatus. This wasn't just a medieval shack. It was often a sophisticated workshop dedicated to transforming nature's bounty into healing agents. The development of formalized apothecary shops and the profession of pharmacy, with increasing standards for preparation and purity, is a mainstream historical fact associated with the Islamic Golden Age, significantly influenced by comprehensive texts like the Canon. Avicenna's writings in the Canon provided detailed instructions for preparing medicines. He described various methods: simple powders made by grinding dried herbs, decoctions, boiling plant material in water, infusions, steeping herbs in hot water, like making tea, syrups, mixing extracts with honey or sugar, electuaries, pastes made with honey or syrup, pills, ointments, and oils. Each method was chosen based on the properties of the substance and how it needed to interact with the body. Making a syrup, for instance, made a bitter herb more palatable and helped preserve it, while a powder might be preferred for faster absorption. It was like a medieval culinary school, but for medicine, where precision and technique were paramount. You couldn't just wing it. You had to follow the recipe, and the recipe was in the canon. Central to Avicenna's approach to pharmacy was the principle of purity. He stressed the importance of using high-quality ingredients, free from contamination or adulteration. Water used for preparations should be clean, equipment should be spotless, and the raw materials themselves should be fresh and properly stored. This might sound obvious to us, but in an age where hygiene standards were generally low, this emphasis on purity was a significant step towards ensuring the safety and efficacy of medicines. Impure ingredients could introduce toxins or simply render the medicine useless. He even discussed the importance of harvesting plants at the right time of year or day to maximize their potency, another detail demonstrating the care involved. It was a far cry from scooping up whatever dirt-covered root you found by the roadside. Equally important was dosage. Avicenna understood that even beneficial substances could be harmful in the wrong amounts. The canon provided guidance on appropriate dosages for many remedies, often considering the age, sex, temperament, and strength of the patient, as well as the severity of the illness and the potency, degree, of the drug itself. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. The apothecary, working under the physician's direction, or the physician themselves, if they prepared their own medicines, had to carefully measure ingredients to ensure the final compound was the right strength. This focus on precise measurement for tailored dosage was a key part of minimizing side effects and maximizing the gentle effectiveness of the remedy. Minimizing side effects was a constant concern woven into Avicenna's pharmaceutical principles. By choosing milder, plant-based substances first, by focusing on purity, and by carefully controlling dosage, the risk of adverse reactions was inherently lower than with harsh mineral poisons or animal-derived ingredients used without understanding their effects. He also discussed methods to mitigate potential side effects of even moderately potent drugs, such as combining them with other substances that could temper their harshness or aid their digestion. For example, a warming spice might be added to a cooling remedy to prevent it from being too cold for a patient with a cold temperament. It was about subtle adjustments, not blunt instruments. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to crafting cures in this era is the elaborate process sometimes used for creating complex compound remedies. The canon includes formulations with dozens of ingredients, meticulously layered, pounded, heated, or steeped over long periods. Some required specific astrological timing for preparation, a practice not unique to Avicenna but present in some medical traditions of the time, reflecting the interconnected worldview. While Avicenna himself was a rationalist, some of the pharmaceutical practices he documented, or that developed alongside his work, incorporated elements like this. Imagine a recipe that not only requires 50 different herbs but also specifies it must be mixed under a waxing moon. It shows the blend of empirical observation and sometimes less scientific beliefs that coexisted. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's detailed pharmaceutical instructions and his strong emphasis on purity, dosage, and minimizing side effects represented a truly innovative leap forward in the practice of pharmacy, or if he was primarily codifying and elevating best practices that were already emerging in sophisticated centers of learning and trade within the Islamic world, drawing on Persian, Indian, and Greek traditions. Did he invent these standards, or was he the most influential voice in documenting and promoting them, thereby formalizing the pharmaceutical profession? Regardless, his systematic approach provided a blueprint for crafting medicines that aimed for efficacy without unnecessary harshness, a stark contrast to the crude and often dangerous concoctions found elsewhere. The preparation of medicines in Avicenna's world, guided by his principles, was a careful, deliberate process. It wasn't just about treating disease. It was about supporting the body's return to balance using substances from the natural world, prepared with knowledge and precision. This focus on crafting gentle cures was an integral part of his overall medical philosophy, demonstrating that even when moving beyond diet and lifestyle, the physician's goal remained subtle, supportive intervention, not violent assault on the body. This careful preparation ensured that the healing herbs and natural substances he favored could be administered effectively and safely, laying the groundwork for how these remedies were used in conjunction with his understanding of the mind's role in health. So, you've seen how Avicenna prioritized lifestyle adjustments, diet, rest, exercise, and then moved to carefully prepared, gentler medicinal substances when needed. But his holistic view of health didn't stop at the physical body and its humors. He understood something that feels incredibly modern: the powerful connection between the mind and the body, and the crucial role of emotional and psychological states in both causing and curing illness. In an age where mental illness was often attributed to demonic possession or severe humoral imbalance requiring drastic physical intervention, Avicenna recognized that what was going on inside your head and heart had a direct impact on your physical well-being. He wasn't just treating the body, he was treating the whole person, mind included, and often with surprisingly gentle methods. Imagine for a moment that you're feeling physically unwell, maybe digestive issues, headaches, or just a general malaise. You've tried adjusting your diet and getting more sleep, and perhaps taken a gentle herbal remedy. Avicenna, sitting with you, wouldn't just focus on your physical symptoms. He would also ask about your emotional state. Are you anxious? Grieving? Experiencing intense fear or anger? He believed that strong emotions could directly influence the balance of the humors and the functioning of organs. For instance, excessive anger was thought to heat the yellow bile, potentially leading to fevers or inflammation. Chronic sadness or fear could cool and dry the black bile, contributing to melancholic states or digestive problems. This recognition of the psychosomatic connection, that the mind affects the body, and its integration into diagnosis and treatment is a mainstream historical fact about Avicenna's medical philosophy, detailed in the canon. He didn't just acknowledge it, he built it into his systematic approach to understanding and treating illness. This understanding led him to incorporate psychological approaches into his healing methods. While he didn't have therapists in the modern sense, his interactions with patients went beyond just prescribing remedies. He emphasized the importance of the physician's demeanor, being reassuring, instilling hope, and building trust. He believed that the patient's belief in the physician and the treatment could positively influence the outcome. This focus on empathy and the psychological impact of the doctor-patient relationship was a gentle, yet powerful, tool in his arsenal. It's like realizing that sometimes, just having someone listen and make you feel understood is half the battle, even before they give you any medicine. Imagine the relief compared to a grim-faced healer preparing to apply hot irons. Avicenna also discussed the therapeutic use of sensory experiences to influence emotional states, and thus physical health. Pleasant sights, sounds, like music, smells, like aromatic herbs or perfumes, and even tastes could be prescribed to lift a patient's spirits and help restore humoral balance. If someone was suffering from melancholia, he might recommend being in pleasant environments, listening to soothing music, or smelling fragrant roses. This wasn't just about making the patient comfortable, it was a deliberate therapeutic strategy, aimed at gently shifting their internal state through external stimuli. It was like a medieval form of aromatherapy and environmental therapy rolled into one, using the senses to soothe the soul and, by extension, heal the body. Who knew a nice tune could be a medical prescription? A quirky or fringe tidbit related to Avicenna's psychological insights is a story, perhaps apocryphal but illustrative of his ideas, about his treatment of a prince suffering from melancholia who believed he was a cow. The prince would moo and demand to be slaughtered. Instead of harsh physical treatments, Avicenna reportedly agreed to slaughter the prince, but insisted he must first be fattened up. He then gently guided the prince through a process of eating and gaining weight, gradually restoring him to health and convincing him he was too fat to be a good cow, thus breaking the delusion. While the specifics might be embellished, the core of the story reflects Avicenna's willingness to engage with a patient's psychological reality and use gentle, persuasive, and creative means to guide them towards recovery, rather than resorting to force or punishment. It highlights a remarkable level of psychological understanding for the time. Avicenna also recognized the importance of managing one's own emotional life as a preventative measure. His writings suggest that cultivating positive emotions, avoiding excessive worry or stress, and maintaining a sense of purpose were crucial for long-term health. This wasn't just moral advice, it was medical guidance rooted in his understanding of the mind-body connection. He provided advice on how to manage anger, fear, and sadness, often suggesting activities, environmental changes, or even specific foods and remedies that could help temper extreme emotional states. It was an early form of advocating for mental hygiene as part of overall wellness. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's systematic integration of psychological factors into his medical framework represented a truly groundbreaking development, or if it was a more prominent and detailed articulation of ideas about the mind-body connection that were already present, albeit less emphasized, in the Greek, Persian, and Indian medical traditions he synthesized. Did he fundamentally elevate the importance of mental health in medical practice, or was he the most influential figure to clearly document and promote this aspect of healing, making it a central tenet of his authoritative canon? Regardless, His clear articulation of the mind's influence on the body and his gentle approaches to addressing emotional distress were remarkably progressive for his time and stood in contrast to practices elsewhere that often ignored or mishandled psychological ailments. His insights into the mind weren't separate from his other gentle methods, they were deeply integrated. A patient suffering from anxiety might be prescribed not only calming herbs but also advised on dietary changes, avoiding stimulating foods, encouraged to engage in gentle exercise, like walking in nature, and reassured by the physician. The physical and psychological interventions worked hand in hand, a truly holistic approach. This gentle, integrated approach to mental and emotional well-being was another facet of Avicenna's medical genius, demonstrating his commitment to healing the whole person and laying the groundwork for understanding how emotional states interact with physical health, a principle that feels incredibly relevant even today. This recognition of the mind's power meant that even when physical interventions were necessary, they were approached with an awareness of the patient's emotional state, influencing how even potentially harsh procedures like surgery were viewed and performed. So, you've explored Avicenna's deep dives into diet, rest, exercise, gentle herbs, careful pharmacy, and even the subtle power of the mind. It paints a picture of a remarkably gentle, holistic physician, a far cry from the medieval healer ready to grab the nearest red-hot poker. But let's be realistic. Even with the best diet and the most soothing rosewater, sometimes the body faces challenges that require more direct intervention. Fractures happen, abscesses need draining, and tumors, even if poorly understood, sometimes need removing. Avicenna was a pragmatic physician operating in a tough era. He knew that while gentle methods were the first and best path, they weren't always sufficient. And so, his canon, this blueprint for gentle healing, also included sections on surgery. Now, the very word surgery, in the medieval context probably sends a shiver down your spine. And for good reason. In many places, it was a brutal affair, often performed by barbers or itinerant practitioners with limited anatomical knowledge and even less understanding of hygiene. Imagine being held down, probably wide awake, or maybe knocked out with a swift blow to the head, if you were lucky, while someone cut into you with unsterilized tools, relying on speed and brute force. The pain would be unimaginable, and the risk of dying from infection afterward was incredibly high. Surviving surgery was less about the procedure itself and more about sheer luck and a robust immune system. It was the absolute last thing you would ever want to face. But here's where Avicenna's philosophy, even in this most invasive of medical practices, still aimed for something less traumatic. While surgery was presented as a last resort in the canon, reserved for conditions that couldn't be treated by any other means, his descriptions of surgical procedures emphasize principles that, while not matching modern standards, aimed to minimize harm and promote healing compared to the cruder practices common elsewhere. He wasn't performing heart transplants, obviously, but for the procedures known at the time, setting bones, treating wounds, dealing with external growths, removing bladder stones, he advocated for a systematic approach. This inclusion of detailed descriptions of surgical techniques, positioned as a final option after other treatments failed, is a mainstream historical fact about Avicenna's comprehensive medical text. He acknowledged the necessity of surgery but framed it within his overall hierarchy of interventions. Avicenna stressed the importance of anatomical knowledge for the surgeon, limited though that knowledge was without systematic dissection. He described specific instruments needed for certain procedures and discussed techniques for controlling bleeding, which was a major cause of death. He also advocated for cleaning wounds, often using wine or other astringent liquids, which, while not true sterilization, was a step towards reducing infection compared to leaving wounds open or packing them with potentially contaminated materials. Think of it as going from, let's just wrap it in a dirty rag, to, okay, maybe rinse it out with something that might kill some germs. Small steps, but important ones in that era. His approach to fractures, for instance, was meticulous. He described various types of fractures and detailed methods for reduction, setting the bone back in place, and immobilization, splinting, using materials like wood or reeds bound with bandages. He emphasized the importance of gentle manipulation during reduction to avoid further trauma, and the need for the splint to be firm but not so tight as to cut off circulation. It was a hands-on, practical application of his desire to support the body's natural healing processes, in this case, bone knitting, with minimal additional damage. It wasn't just about fixing the break. It was about doing it in a way that allowed the body to recover effectively. Even when dealing with more complex issues like tumors or abscesses, Avicenna's descriptions aimed for careful excision or drainage, emphasizing the need to remove diseased tissue completely but with as little damage to surrounding healthy tissue as possible. He discussed techniques for lancing boils and draining pus, recognizing the body's need to expel infection. These weren't pain-free procedures by any stretch, but the emphasis on careful technique and post-operative care, like wound dressing and promoting drainage, reflected a desire to guide the body towards healing rather than simply hacking away at the problem. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to Avicenna's surgical discussions is his detailed description of techniques for removing arrows or foreign bodies from the flesh, including specific tools and methods for extraction that aim to minimize tearing and further injury. He also described procedures for dealing with eye conditions, sometimes involving delicate work on the eyelids or even early attempts at couching for cataracts, pushing the cloudy lens out of the line of vision, demonstrating a surprising level of surgical ambition and refinement for the time, even if the outcomes were often unpredictable. Imagine trying to perform delicate eye surgery without proper magnification or anesthesia. It underscores both the desperation of patients and the ambition of physicians like Avicenna. Avicenna also placed importance on post-operative care, which was often overlooked in medieval surgery. This included managing pain, though effective methods were limited, preventing infection through dressings and cleanliness, and providing the patient with appropriate diet and rest to support recovery, bringing us back to his foundational gentle principles. The surgical intervention was a necessary evil, but the healing process afterward relied heavily on the same gentle methods used for less severe ailments. Historians still argue whether the surgical techniques described in the canon were commonly practiced by physicians in the Islamic world, or if they represented an ideal standard that only the most skilled practitioners could achieve. Was Avicenna himself a frequent surgeon, or did he primarily document techniques based on the work of others, adding his own theoretical framework? Regardless, his systematic documentation and emphasis on anatomical knowledge, careful technique, and post-operative care provided a blueprint for a more rational and less brutal approach to surgery than was prevalent in many other parts of the world at the time. While modern surgery is vastly different, the underlying principle Avicenna advocated for, surgery as a last resort, performed with as much care and precision as possible to facilitate the body's healing, resonates. Even in the most invasive part of his medical practice, his commitment to minimizing trauma and supporting the patient's recovery shines through. It shows that his gentle philosophy wasn't about avoiding difficult interventions altogether, but about ensuring they were necessary, performed with skill, and integrated into a broader plan for restoring the patient's overall balance and well-being. This careful consideration for the patient's comfort and recovery, even after potentially painful procedures, was a reflection of his deeper commitment to patient-centered care. So, you've seen how Avicenna, even when faced with the grim necessity of surgery, still sought methods that were less brutal, more informed, and aimed at minimizing harm and promoting healing. He wasn't just a brilliant diagnostician or a master of complex remedies. He was also deeply concerned with the experience of being a patient. In an era where medical encounters could be terrifying, impersonal, and often painful, Avicenna championed an idea that feels profoundly human and compassionate: the importance of the healing touch, of patient-centered care, built on empathy, trust, and yes, a good bedside manner. Imagine you are unwell, scared, and vulnerable in the medieval world. You've heard stories of painful treatments and uncertain outcomes. Now, picture sitting with Avicenna. His approach, as described or implied in the canon and accounts of his life, wasn't just about clinically assessing your humors or prescribing a remedy. It was about engaging with you as a person. He understood that healing wasn't solely a mechanical process of fixing a broken part or rebalancing fluids. It involved the patient's state of mind, their trust in the physician, and their will to recover. This emphasis on the physician-patient relationship, recognizing the psychological and emotional needs of the patient as integral to the healing process, is a mainstream historical fact about Avicenna's medical philosophy, setting him apart from practitioners who might have focused solely on the physical ailment. He believed that a physician's demeanor could significantly impact a patient's outcome. A doctor should be calm, reassuring, and instill hope. Think about it. If your doctor walks in looking stressed, dismissive, and barely makes eye contact, how confident do you feel? Now imagine someone who listens attentively, explains things clearly, even within the limits of medieval understanding, and genuinely seems to care about your well-being. That feeling of being seen and heard, of having confidence in your healer, is a powerful force. Avicenna codified this, stressing that the physician must gain the patient's trust. He even suggested that sometimes, simply the physician's presence and reassuring words could be therapeutic, especially for conditions influenced by the mind, which, remember, he understood were tied to physical health. It was like having a doctor who didn't just give you medicine, but also gave you a much-needed dose of confidence and calm. This focus on trust wasn't just about making the patient feel better emotionally. It was practical medicine. If a patient trusted their doctor, they were more likely to follow advice on diet, rest, and taking prescribed remedies, even if those remedies tasted awful or required difficult lifestyle changes. Avicenna's gentle prescriptions, the focus on diet, rest, and exercise, required patient cooperation. You couldn't force someone to eat differently or sleep more. You had to convince them, educate them, and empower them by building a relationship based on mutual respect and trust. This required patience and good communication skills from the physician, qualities Avicenna valued highly. It wasn't just about being smart. It was about being kind and persuasive. Imagine trying to explain the intricacies of humoral balance and the importance of avoiding hot foods to a frightened patient without any empathy. It probably wouldn't go well. Avicenna's concept of bedside manner extended to respecting patient modesty and privacy, particularly important in an era where medical examinations could be invasive and undignified. While detailed examination was necessary for diagnosis, he advocated for sensitivity and discretion, especially when treating women. This wasn't just social custom. It was part of creating an environment where the patient felt safe and respected, further building that crucial foundation of trust needed for healing. It was a subtle but significant aspect of his gentle approach, recognizing the patient's vulnerability and treating them with dignity, even in their most vulnerable state. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to Avicenna's patient-centered approach is the anecdotal evidence suggesting he would sometimes involve patients in their own diagnosis, asking them detailed questions about their symptoms, feelings, and habits, and explaining his reasoning, or at least the humoral framework, behind his proposed treatments. While physicians throughout history have asked questions, the emphasis on patient input and explanation, treating the patient as an active participant rather than a passive recipient of treatment, feels remarkably ahead of its time. Imagine a medieval doctor actually listening to you and explaining why he's recommending barley water instead of bloodletting. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about his respect for the individual patient. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's documented emphasis on bedside manner and patient trust was truly a novel development he pioneered, or if it was a more prominent and detailed articulation of ethical principles that were already present, albeit less systematically applied, in the Hippocratic tradition and other medical texts he studied. Was he inventing the concept of a good doctor, or simply providing the definitive blueprint for it that resonated for centuries? Regardless, his clear articulation of these principles in the canon gave them significant weight and influence. His focus on the healing touch wasn't just literal, though physical examination and palpation were part of diagnosis, but metaphorical. It was the touch of empathy, the touch of reassurance, the touch of knowledge applied with care. It was the understanding that a fearful or despondent patient was less likely to recover than one who felt hopeful and supported. This is why his psychological insights were so important. They directly informed how he interacted with patients, using conversation, reassurance, and sometimes even prescribing pleasant experiences like music or fragrant baths, all aimed at supporting the patient's emotional state and, by extension, their physical healing. This patient-centered approach was a natural extension of his holistic philosophy. If health was about the balance of the whole person, mind, body, and environment, then treating the person, not just the disease, was essential. It meant seeing the patient not just as a collection of symptoms, but as an individual with a unique constitution, history, and emotional life, all of which influenced their illness and their capacity for recovery. It was about tailoring the treatment not just to the disease, but to the person experiencing the disease. In an era where medicine could be frighteningly impersonal and brutal, Avicenna's insistence on empathy, trust, and a caring demeanor offered a beacon of humanity. It reminded physicians that their role wasn't just to apply techniques or administer drugs, but to guide and support a fellow human being through suffering. This commitment to the patient as a person, to the healing touch of compassion and trust, was perhaps one of the most gentle and enduring aspects of his remarkable medical legacy, a principle that feels as vital today as it was 1,000 years ago. This focus on the patient's well-being and experience stands in fascinating contrast to some of the harsher medical styles prevalent in other parts of the world during the medieval period. So, you've gotten a sense of Avicenna's world, a vibrant intellectual hub in the Islamic Golden Age, a place where ancient knowledge was preserved and built upon. And you've seen his surprisingly gentle approach, prioritizing diet, rest, and exercise, using careful, plant-based remedies, understanding the mind-body connection, and insisting on empathy and trust in the doctor-patient relationship, even when surgery was unavoidable. It's a picture of medical practice that feels remarkably nuanced and humane. Now, let's contrast that with some of what was happening medically in other parts of the world during roughly the same period, particularly in medieval Europe. Imagine leaving the relatively ordered apothecary of Avicenna's influence and stepping into a scene elsewhere. While there were certainly skilled practitioners and centers of learning in Europe, the overall medical landscape was often fragmented, heavily influenced by superstition, religious dogma, and a less complete access to the classical texts that scholars in the Islamic world had preserved and developed. The humoral theory was also the dominant framework in Europe, inherited from the Greeks, but its application could be far more aggressive and less tempered by the systematic, gentle hierarchy Avicenna championed. Think back to our opening scenario, the leeches, the hot irons, the questionable concoctions. These weren't just caricatures. They were staples of medieval European medicine for centuries. Bloodletting, the practice of deliberately drawing blood from a patient, was incredibly common, used for a vast array of ailments from fevers and headaches to mental illness. The belief was that illness was often caused by an excess of blood, and removing it would restore balance. It was performed by physicians, surgeons, and often barbers, who were already skilled with sharp instruments. You might be bled from a vein, or have leeches applied, sometimes dozens at a time. While bloodletting was also known and occasionally used in the Islamic world, Avicenna's canon presented it as a treatment of last resort, to be used cautiously and for very specific conditions, whereas in parts of Europe, it was often the first intervention for almost anything. It was the medical equivalent of, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" but with significantly higher stakes and mess. Similarly, purgatives and emetics, substances to induce vomiting or violent diarrhea, were widely used to expel bad humors. These could be incredibly harsh, made from potent herbs or mineral compounds, and could severely weaken an already ill patient. While Avicenna also used purgatives, his canon categorized them by strength and emphasized using the mildest effective ones first, always considering the patient's constitution. The European approach often seemed less concerned with this gentle escalation, sometimes administering powerful substances that were as likely to harm as to heal. Imagine being violently ill, and then being given something to make you even more violently ill, just to make sure those pesky humors got the message. Surgery in medieval Europe, as we touched on before, was often even more terrifying than the limited procedures Avicenna described. Without the same emphasis on anatomical study, dissection faced significant religious and social hurdles, or the systematic approach to cleanliness and post-operative care that Avicenna advocated. It was a brutal, high-risk endeavor. Fractures might be set crudely, wounds cauterized with hot irons to stop bleeding, excruciatingly painful, and amputations performed with terrifying speed and little regard for pain management or infection control. It was a realm where survival often felt miraculous. A mainstream historical fact that starkly highlights the difference is the relative cleanliness and organization of hospitals and medical schools in the Islamic world compared to many parts of medieval Europe during the height of the Golden Age. Cities like Baghdad and Cairo had sophisticated bimaristans, hospitals, that served both as treatment centers and teaching institutions, often with separate wards for different diseases, pharmacies, libraries, and even sometimes running water. While European hospitals existed, they were often more focused on providing care for the poor and sick rather than being centers of advanced medical learning and practice in the same systematic way, and hygiene standards could be very basic. The institutional support for medical education and practice in the Islamic world was often more advanced. A quirky or fringe tidbit from medieval European medicine involves the use of urine as a diagnostic tool, and sometimes even as a remedy or antiseptic. Uroscopy, the examination of urine for color, clarity, smell, and even taste, was a major diagnostic method, with elaborate charts linking urine characteristics to specific diseases and humoral imbalances. Physicians would carry vials of urine around to examine them. Less appealingly, urine was sometimes used to wash wounds or even taken internally. While Avicenna's canon also discussed examining urine as part of diagnosis, it was one tool among many, integrated into a broader examination, and certainly not advocated for internal use or wound cleaning in the same way. Imagine your doctor today asking for a urine sample and then taking a sip to check on your health. Historians still argue whether the relative backwardness of medieval European medicine compared to the Islamic world in this period was solely due to a lack of access to classical texts and institutional support, or if different cultural and religious perspectives on the body, disease, and the role of the physician also played a significant role. Did the dominance of humoral theory in Europe inherently lead to harsher treatments, or was it the specific interpretation and application of that theory, less tempered by the pragmatic, patient-focused approach seen in figures like Avicenna? Regardless, the contrast between the systematic, gentle hierarchy of interventions favored by Avicenna and the more common, immediate resort to drastic measures like extensive bloodletting and harsh purges in parts of Europe is undeniable. Avicenna's approach wasn't just different, it was, in many ways, more rational, more patient-centered, and less reliant on brute force. By prioritizing prevention, lifestyle, and gentle remedies, he offered a path to healing that minimized suffering and supported the body's natural capacities. This wasn't to say medieval European medicine was entirely without merit or gentle practices. Herbal remedies and supportive care were also part of the tradition, but the default response to illness often leaned towards the aggressive, the painful, and the potentially harmful. Avicenna's canon presented a comprehensive, authoritative alternative that placed gentleness and patient well-being at its core. This contrast highlights just how revolutionary his systematic approach was, a beacon of reasoned, humane medicine in a period often characterized by suffering and crude interventions. And this beacon wouldn't stay confined to the East. Its light would eventually spread, influencing medical thought across continents. So, you've seen this contrast. The surprisingly gentle, systematic, patient-focused approach of Avicenna in the Islamic Golden Age, rooted in lifestyle, subtle remedies, and a recognition of the mind-body connection, standing apart from some of the harsher, more interventionist practices prevalent elsewhere, particularly in parts of medieval Europe. But ideas, especially powerful and useful ones, have a way of traveling. Avicenna's world wasn't isolated, and the intellectual currents of the Islamic Golden Age wouldn't stay confined to the East. His wisdom, codified in that massive canon we talked about, was destined to spread, crossing cultural and linguistic boundaries to influence medical thought for centuries to come. Imagine the scene in places like Spain, Al-Andalus, or Sicily during the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. These were crossroads of civilizations, places where Arabic, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew cultures mingled. European scholars, hungry for the knowledge that had been preserved and advanced in the Islamic world while much of Europe was recovering from the fall of the Roman Empire, flocked to these centers. They weren't just interested in philosophy or mathematics. They were particularly keen to access the wealth of medical texts. This period saw a massive movement of translation, primarily from Arabic into Latin, bringing the works of ancient masters like Galen and Hippocrates back into the European mainstream, along with the commentaries and original contributions of Islamic scholars like Avicenna, Remedies, and others. This widespread translation movement, where Arabic texts, including Avicenna's canon, were rendered into Latin and other European languages, is a mainstream historical fact that profoundly impacted the course of Western science and medicine. It was like finally getting your hands on the updated manual after working with a severely outdated version for centuries. And among the most sought-after texts for translation was Avicenna's Canon of Medicine. It wasn't just a medical book, it was the medical book. Its comprehensive nature, its systematic organization, and its logical framework appealed strongly to the emerging universities and scholarly traditions in Europe. The most famous Latin translation was completed by Gerard of Cremona in Toledo, Spain, in the 12th century. This translation was a monumental undertaking, turning a vast, complex Arabic work into the language of European scholarship. Once translated, the canon didn't just sit on a shelf, it exploded onto the scene. It quickly became a cornerstone of medical education across Europe. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a required textbook for every medical student, from Paris to Bologna, from Oxford to Salerno. It provided a structure for understanding medicine that was far more detailed and organized than many existing European texts. The influence of the canon in Europe was immense. It shaped the curriculum in medical schools, provided a reference for physicians, and influenced the development of medical theory and practice for over 500 years. European physicians studied Avicenna's anatomy, based on Galen, but systematized by Avicenna, his physiology, his detailed descriptions of diseases, his extensive materia medica, and yes, even his therapeutic hierarchy, although the emphasis on gentle methods wasn't always adopted with the same rigor as the more interventionist parts. His authority was so great that he was often referred to simply as the Prince of Physicians in Latin texts. It's pretty impressive to become the guy in a completely different culture and language centuries after you lived. Imagine if a modern medical textbook written today became the standard text everywhere in the world for half a millennium. That was Avicenna's impact. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to the translation and early reception of the canon in Europe is the story that some European scholars initially struggled to reconcile Avicenna's philosophical ideas. He was also a major philosopher, remember, with prevailing European religious and philosophical thought. While his medical authority was widely accepted, his more philosophical works sometimes caused controversy. There were even attempts to Christianize, or otherwise adapt his ideas to fit within European frameworks, highlighting the complex process of knowledge transfer and assimilation across cultures. It wasn't just a simple copy-paste, it involved interpretation, adaptation, and sometimes, wrestling with ideas that didn't neatly fit into existing worldviews. Imagine trying to teach evolutionary biology using a textbook that also includes detailed sections on medieval theology. It was a blend of different intellectual traditions. Historians still argue whether the European adoption of the canon led to a significant shift towards Avicenna's preferred gentle methods, or if European physicians primarily incorporated his anatomical and pathological knowledge while continuing to rely more heavily on traditional European practices like extensive bloodletting and harsh purges. Did the translation truly spread his gentle philosophy, or did it primarily provide a more sophisticated theoretical framework that could still be used to justify existing, harsher interventions? Regardless, the canon undeniably provided a systematic, comprehensive, and theoretically rich basis for medical practice that was widely adopted and studied, even if the full nuance of Avicenna's gentle hierarchy wasn't always fully embraced or prioritized by every European practitioner. The journey of the canon wasn't just a one-way street of knowledge transfer. As European medicine developed, scholars built upon and critiqued Avicenna's work. His authority, while immense, wasn't absolute forever. Later physicians and anatomists, particularly during the Renaissance, began to challenge aspects of his work, often based on renewed direct study of ancient Greek texts or their own observations, like Vesalius and Anatomy. But even as parts of the canon were questioned or superseded, its fundamental structure, its detailed descriptions, and its role as a standard reference point continued to shape medical discourse. It was the foundation upon which later medical understanding was built, even when that understanding moved in new directions. So, this isn't just a story about an ancient book, it's a story about the global flow of knowledge, the power of translation, and the enduring influence of a brilliant mind. Avicenna's gentle approach, his systematic thinking, and his comprehensive medical blueprint, preserved and translated, became part of the intellectual fabric of medicine far beyond the borders of the Islamic world. It laid the groundwork for centuries of medical teaching and practice in Europe, carrying echoes of his gentle philosophy across continents and through time, even if those echoes sometimes faded or were reinterpreted along the way. The translation of his wisdom wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a pivotal moment in the history of medicine, ensuring that the Prince of Physicians would continue to reign in medical schools for half a millennium, setting the stage for understanding how his monumental work remained central for centuries before its principles were later revisited. So, you've seen how Avicenna's massive medical blueprint, the canon of medicine, made its way across continents through dedicated translators, becoming a must-have text in the burgeoning universities of Europe. But its influence wasn't fleeting. This wasn't just a popular book for a few decades. Avicenna's canon became the undisputed authority in Western medical education and practice for an astonishingly long time. We're talking centuries here. Imagine a single textbook remaining the standard curriculum for over 500 years. Your grandkids' would still be studying the same material you did. That was the enduring echo of the canon. For half a millennium, from roughly the 12th century right through the Renaissance, and even into the 17th century, if you went to medical school in Europe, you would be studying Avicenna. His systematic organization, covering anatomy, physiology, diseases from head to toe, materia medica, and therapeutics, provided a framework that no other single text could match. Physicians relied on it for diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. Pharmacists used its detailed materia medica and formulations to prepare medicines. It was the bedrock upon which medical knowledge was built and transmitted. This remarkable longevity and centrality of the canon of medicine as the primary medical textbook in European universities and a key reference for practitioners for over 5 centuries is a mainstream historical fact that underscores its immense impact. Its influence permeated medical thought so deeply that challenging it often felt like challenging the very foundations of medicine itself. Its dominance wasn't just about lack of alternatives. It was about its perceived comprehensiveness and logical structure. In a world where medical knowledge could still feel scattered and inconsistent, Avicenna provided a unified, rational system, based primarily on the accessible humoral theory, but presented with a level of detail and organization that was unprecedented. Even as physicians began to question aspects of humoral theory or gain new anatomical insights, often based on translations of even older Greek texts that Avicenna himself had synthesized, the canon remained the primary organizational structure for medical thinking. You might disagree with a specific point, but you were still likely to find that point within Avicenna's comprehensive index. It was the medical library and search engine all rolled into one massive, leather-bound package. However, the reign of the Prince of Physicians wasn't absolute forever. As the Renaissance brought a renewed interest in direct observation, anatomical studies, including dissection, which became more accepted in some areas, and experimentation, discrepancies between Avicenna's descriptions, which were largely based on Galen's animal dissections, not human, and observed reality began to emerge. Figures like Andreas Vesalius in the 16th century, with his groundbreaking anatomical atlas De Humani Corporis Fabrica, directly challenged Avicenna's anatomical authority, based on his own human dissections. But even then, Avicenna wasn't immediately discarded. Physicians often tried to reconcile the new findings with the old framework, or viewed the new anatomy as simply adding detail to Avicenna's overall structure. Change in deeply entrenched scientific paradigms is often slow and messy. A quirky or fringe tidbit about the legacy of the canon is the sheer number of commentaries, summaries, and adaptations written about it in both the Islamic world and Europe over these centuries. Scholars dedicated their lives to analyzing, explaining, and building upon Avicenna's work. There were abridgments for students, massive multi-volume commentaries exploring every nuance, and practical guides for physicians based on its principles. It wasn't just read, it was studied and debated intensely. Some of these commentaries focused on specific sections, like the pulse diagnosis or the materia medica, turning them into separate fields of study. Imagine writing a 10-volume explanation of a single chapter of your textbook. It shows the almost religious reverence with which the text was treated, a testament to its perceived wisdom, even if later generations would find errors. Historians still argue whether the long-lasting dominance of Avicenna's canon in European medicine ultimately hindered or helped the progress of medical science. Did it provide a crucial, systematic foundation that allowed later advances to be built upon, or did its sheer authority and the errors it contained, particularly in anatomy and physiology, slow down the adoption of new discoveries? Was it a necessary stepping stone, or a comfortable but ultimately limiting intellectual cage? Regardless, its influence was undeniable and shaped the medical landscape for centuries. Even as the humoral theory gradually faded with the advent of germ theory and cellular pathology in the 19th century, and specific remedies from the canon were replaced by modern pharmaceuticals, aspects of Avicenna's broader philosophy didn't entirely disappear. The idea of treating the whole patient, the importance of lifestyle, the recognition of the mind-body connection, and the value of a systematic approach to diagnosis and treatment, these principles, while not always explicitly attributed to him, were revisited and gained renewed appreciation in later medical thought. The gentle giants of diet, rest, and exercise, for example, have made a significant comeback in modern wellness and preventative medicine. It's like medicine went through a phase of focusing intensely on attacking specific diseases with powerful tools, and then circled back to realize that maybe the old guy talking about balance and lifestyle had a point after all. The canon's echo wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a continuous hum in the background of medical history, a reminder of a time when a comprehensive, rational, and surprisingly gentle approach to healing was codified and elevated to the highest authority. Its legacy demonstrates the power of organized knowledge and the slow, complex way that scientific understanding evolves, building upon the past even as it moves towards the future. This enduring influence, and the later revival of some of its core principles, paved the way for connecting Avicenna's ancient wisdom to contemporary ideas about holistic health and integrated medicine. So, you've journeyed with Avicenna from the harsh realities of medieval medicine to his surprisingly gentle philosophy, witnessed the birth of his monumental canon, and followed its influence across centuries and continents, even as it was eventually superseded by newer scientific understanding. But here's the fascinating thing. The echo of the canon didn't just fade entirely. While the specific humoral theories and many of the remedies were replaced by modern science, some of Avicenna's core principles, those gentle giants we talked about, have found a surprising resonance in contemporary medical thought and wellness practices. It's like finding an old, dusty blueprint in the attic and realizing some of the foundational ideas are still incredibly relevant today. Think about where modern medicine has come in the last century or so. We've made incredible strides in understanding specific diseases, developing targeted drugs, and performing complex surgeries. But there's also a growing recognition that focusing only on treating symptoms or isolated parts of the body isn't always enough for true health and well-being. This is where Avicenna's holistic view starts to sound less like ancient history and more like a forward-thinking approach. Remember his emphasis on the 6 non-naturals: diet, exercise, sleep, environment, emotional state, and elimination? These are precisely the factors that contemporary integrated medicine, functional medicine, and the broader wellness movement highlight as fundamental pillars of health. Your doctor today might not talk about balancing humors, but they'll definitely ask about your sleep habits, your stress levels, and what you eat before reaching for a prescription pad for every single ailment. It's a direct callback to Avicenna's hierarchy, prioritizing lifestyle and prevention before potent interventions. The modern appreciation for the gut-brain connection, the impact of chronic stress on physical health, the crucial role of sleep for recovery and immune function, and the power of exercise for both physical and mental well-being. These are all concepts that Avicenna, within the framework of his time, understood and integrated into his medical system. His recognition of the mind's influence on the body wasn't just a philosophical aside. It was a practical guide for physicians. Today, we have psychotherapy, mindfulness practices, and a wealth of research on the psychosomatic link, but the underlying principle, that emotional and psychological states are vital components of physical health, is pure Avicenna. Imagine explaining modern stress reduction techniques to a medieval peasant, and then realizing Avicenna was already recommending pleasant music and calming environments 1,000 years ago. He didn't have the neuroscience, but he had the observation and the wisdom. Even in the realm of medicinal substances, while modern pharmacology has moved far beyond medieval apothecaries, there's a renewed interest in plant-based remedies and natural compounds. While this field requires rigorous scientific validation, the idea of looking to nature for healing agents, and understanding their effects in a nuanced way, even if the framework is now biochemistry, not humoral qualities, echoes Avicenna's extensive materia medica. His careful descriptions and focus on minimizing harm feel relevant in an age grappling with the side effects of powerful synthetic drugs. You might chuckle at the idea of gazelle-like pulses, but the underlying principle of detailed observation and finding subtle clues in the body's signals is still fundamental to diagnosis. A mainstream historical fact demonstrating this modern resonance is the continued scholarly interest in Avicenna's canon, not just as a historical artifact, but for potential insights. Researchers today study his descriptions of diseases and treatments, sometimes finding surprisingly accurate clinical observations or remedies that warrant further investigation through modern scientific methods. For instance, some of the plant remedies he described for specific conditions are being studied for their pharmacological properties. His detailed clinical descriptions, separated from the humoral explanations, can sometimes offer valuable historical data for understanding the prevalence and manifestation of certain illnesses in the past. It's not that we're going back to practicing medieval medicine, but we're acknowledging that there was valuable knowledge and keen observation within that system that might still hold clues. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this modern connection is the emergence of Avicenna-inspired, or Islamic medicine, wellness centers and practices in various parts of the world today. These often draw on his emphasis on diet, lifestyle, emotional balance, and traditional herbal remedies, sometimes blending them with modern diagnostic techniques. While these approaches vary in their scientific rigor and may interpret Avicenna's work through a specific lens, their existence highlights a cultural and philosophical pull back towards the holistic, gentle principles he championed, suggesting a desire for healthcare that looks beyond just treating symptoms. It's like a historical fan club, but for medical philosophy. Historians still argue whether the modern renewed interest in holistic health, preventative medicine, and the mind-body connection is a direct, conscious revival of Avicenna's specific ideas, or if it's an independent evolution of medical thought that happens to converge on principles that he articulated exceptionally well 1,000 years ago. Did his canon plant seeds that lay dormant for centuries before flowering again, or are these contemporary trends simply parallel developments driven by the limitations of purely reductionist medical models? Regardless, the parallels are striking and undeniable. Avicenna's ancient wisdom about balance, the power of lifestyle, the importance of the mind, and the value of gentle interventions feels remarkably relevant in our search for more integrated and patient-centered healthcare today. His canon, though a product of its time, contained principles that transcended the limitations of medieval knowledge and spoke to fundamental truths about human health and healing. He was, in many ways, advocating for a form of preventative and personalized medicine centuries before those terms existed. His legacy isn't just in the historical texts he wrote. It's in the enduring idea that true healing involves treating the whole person, with knowledge, compassion, and a surprising amount of gentleness. This connection between his ancient world and our modern one underscores the lasting impact of this gentle giant, leading us to a final reflection on his unique contribution and the power of his approach. So, we've followed the thread of Avicenna's influence all the way from the bustling libraries of the Islamic Golden Age to the principles echoing in modern wellness today. We've seen how his monumental canon of medicine wasn't just a collection of facts, but a systematic blueprint built on a philosophy of balance, prevention, and crucially, gentleness. We started in a medieval world that often felt terrifyingly harsh when illness struck, filled with the specter of bloodletting and brutal purges, and discovered a physician who offered a different vision, one rooted in supporting the body's own capacity to heal. Reflecting on Avicenna's unique contribution, it's clear he wasn't just a compiler of ancient knowledge. He was a brilliant synthesizer and innovator who prioritized the well-being and comfort of the patient in a way that felt revolutionary for his time. While humoral theory was the common language of medicine, his dialect was one of subtle adjustments, of nurturing the body back to harmony through diet, rest, and exercise before ever considering harsher measures. His emphasis on the 6 non-naturals wasn't just theoretical. It was a practical guide that put the power of health maintenance into the hands of the individual, guided by a physician who understood the interconnectedness of mind, body, and environment. Remember that idea of treating the whole person? That was Avicenna, centuries before holistic medicine became a buzzword. He saw that a worried mind could sicken the body, and that a soothing environment, or a kind word, could be as therapeutic as any herb. His approach to materia medica, favoring plant-based remedies and emphasizing purity and precise dosage, stood in contrast to some of the more haphazard and potentially dangerous concoctions found elsewhere. He wasn't against powerful medicines, but he believed they should be used judiciously, with full understanding of their effects and potential downsides, always aiming to minimize harm. And even in the realm of surgery, the most invasive practice of all, he advocated for knowledge, technique, and post-operative care that, while limited by the technology of the era, aimed for less trauma and better outcomes than the brutal procedures common in many parts of the world. He approached even the sharpest of blades with a desire for gentleness. Perhaps one of his most profound, and gentle, contributions was his insistence on patient-centered care. The idea that a physician should be empathetic, build trust, and instill hope might seem obvious to us today, but in the medieval world, it was a powerful statement. It recognized the patient not just as a collection of symptoms, but as a vulnerable human being whose emotional state and confidence in their healer were integral to their recovery. The healing touch he championed wasn't just physical, it was the touch of compassion, understanding, and respect. This focus on the human element of healing was a beacon of light in an era often defined by suffering and fear. Avicenna's legacy is immense. His canon of medicine served as the bedrock of medical education across Europe for half a millennium, a mainstream historical fact that speaks volumes about its perceived authority and comprehensiveness. It provided a systematic framework that organized medical knowledge in a way that resonated for centuries, shaping how physicians thought about the body, disease, and treatment. Even as later discoveries in anatomy and physiology challenged specific details, the canon's overall structure and many of its principles remained influential. He truly earned his title as the Prince of Physicians, reigning supreme in medical schools from the 12th to the 17th centuries. Imagine the sheer weight of that legacy. A quirky or fringe tidbit that underscores his dedication and the scale of his output is the fact that Avicenna often wrote while traveling or even in prison, dictating sections of the canon and his other philosophical works from memory. Stories describe scribes struggling to keep up with his flow of thought. This ability to produce such a vast, organized, and detailed body of work under challenging circumstances is almost as mind-boggling as his early prodigy path. It highlights not just his intellect, but a relentless drive to codify and share knowledge, a dedication that ensured his ideas would survive and spread. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a force of nature when it came to documenting his wisdom. Historians still argue whether Avicenna's emphasis on gentle methods and lifestyle was a truly radical departure from existing medical traditions, or if he was primarily the most brilliant and influential figure to systematize and elevate principles that were already present, perhaps less prominently, in the Greek, Persian, and Indian medical texts he studied. Did he invent the gentle path, or was he the one who built the superhighway for it, making it the preferred route? Regardless, his clear articulation and placement of these principles at the forefront of his authoritative canon gave them a prominence and influence they might not otherwise have achieved, fundamentally shaping the ideal of medical practice for centuries. The enduring power of Avicenna's gentle approach lies in its timeless wisdom. While the scientific explanations of his era have been superseded, the fundamental principles he championed, balance, lifestyle, the mind-body connection, patient-centered care, minimizing harm, remain remarkably relevant. In a world that can sometimes feel overwhelming with complex medical technologies and impersonal healthcare systems, the echo of Avicenna's voice reminds us that true healing is holistic, that simple measures can have profound effects, and that empathy and trust are indispensable tools in a physician's kit. He was a gentle giant in an often harsh world, offering a vision of medicine that sought to support, to soothe, and to restore harmony, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire a more humane and integrated approach to health and well-being today. As we bring our journey through Avicenna's world to a close tonight, let the images of those bustling medieval cities, the quiet libraries filled with ancient wisdom, and the calm presence of a physician who chose gentleness before blades begin to soften. Let the hustle and bustle of your own day fade away, like the smoke from a medieval hearth. Feel yourself settling deeper, the sounds around you becoming distant, less important. The stories of harsh remedies and incredible cures blend into a gentle hum. Avicenna, the prince of physicians, whispers from across the centuries, reminding us of the simple, profound power of balance, rest, and the healing touch. His wisdom, a quiet current flowing beneath the surface of modern life, is there for you too, a reminder that sometimes, the gentlest path is the most powerful one. Allow yourself to drift now, carried by the knowledge that even 1,000 years ago, in a world so different from our own, there were those who understood that healing begins with care, with patience, and with peace. Let the final echoes of his canon lull you into calm, deeper, softer